Okay, welcome back to another edition with the full team. Oh, Scott's gone already.
Keep going.
The full what they said. Do I have that right? What they said or what they said?
Yes.
No. We have the
You can
full
never remember the name of the show.
ever. I don't know why. We have the full what they said panel tonight for a special edition. Actually, it's first of two parts. Tonight, we're going to look at the still relatively new Bob Dylan film, A Complete Unknown, which I'm constantly calling No Direction Home, but it's A Complete Unknown, directed by James Mangold. Much anticipated film starring Timothée Chalamet. Correct, right? Am I saying the name correct? I should have, brushed up on these things. Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan, Monica Barbaro as Joan Baez, Elle Fanning as basically as Suze Rotolo, and Edward Norton as Pete Seeger. And we're all going to chime in. We've all, Scott and Stephen have seen it. I'm with Scott Woods, bottom center frame, and Stephen Rubio, top left frame. I believe those guys have each seen it once. I, of course, with my faulty memory, had to rush off and see it twice, but I was glad to this time. How do where do we even start, you guys? Do you want to just start with general impressions, Stephen or Scott?
Go ahead, Stephen.
It's funny. When I was thinking about this in advance, I wondered if I wanted to start with first impressions or if I wanted to already be asking you guys questions. One of the things that I thought about it's not just for us three, but just in general, is whether it matters watching this movie, not necessarily how old you are, but where you were during the time it took place and or what your experiences were during that time. I mean, I lived on the West Coast. I didn't live in New York, but bringing it all back home was one of my first albums I ever bought.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I'm watching this movie partly reliving my late teens or my preteens, I guess that would be. I don't know if that makes a difference or not. There's also what I assume is a large uh, part of the audience that wants to see Timothée Chalamet and don't care what he's in. And those people, I'm assuming, probably don't know a whole lot about Bob Dylan. And now that they've seen the movie, I don't know how much they do know about him. How about you guys? Did you have was he important in your life at any time, or when was he important in your life? I guess that's the question.
I just want to say, Stephen, and what you just said, you basically, I only, right at the end of all my good and bad points, or not good and bad, good and less successful points, I jotted two questions. I think you just sort of covered the same two questions, worded differently. One, does the film take too much prior knowledge for granted? I'm not asking that like it does. I'm just asking it. Like the sort of the checklist syndrome where they can just check things off and you already know what they're talking about. And is there appeal to a younger audience? Those are basically reshuffled and reworded your two questions. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I mean, strictly speaking, I couldn't have been there at the time because I was born during the time that that film was made. But I take your question more as meaning, does it reflect a certain period of my younger days in terms of my interest in Bob Dylan? And that's for sure. I mean, I did come to Dylan like late, like relatively late in my own sort of personal music chronology. I've mentioned this probably to Phil a bunch of times before. Like I grew up, with all the sort of typical classic rock stuff through my brother, the Doors, the Beatles, the Stones. But Dylan was a gap. I think my brother did own Bob Dylan's greatest hits, and I got to know some of those songs at a certain point. And I remember he always had the Milton Glaser poster, and we always kind of liked that. But he, by his own admission, just never really took to Dylan. He was into psychedelic music and all that stuff, but Dylan never grabbed him. So I had to discover him for my own, which I did in college. And I can even remember what really, I mean, I think I'd started to get a bit of an interest, but it was really seeing Don't Look Back Phil will remember this place. This guy Reg Hart
That's where
showed
I saw it too.
films. What's that?
That's where I saw it for the first time too.
Yeah, this guy, Steven, just to give you a little bit of context in Toronto, this basically, Phil probably knows a bit more about the guy, but he's basically a film buff with apparently a collection of movies. This is in the 80s, so it's not like he had DVDs or something like that. But he basically converted his basement of his house, into a place where he would show hard to find movies. And one of them was Don't Look Back. And it was one of those, galvanizing moments for me as a music fan. I remember just coming out of that movie saying, God, I got to go out and get everything by this guy. So yeah, I don't know where to take your question, but it definitely, so yeah, my fandom like took over, for a couple of years, and it's been steady ever since. So I certainly had, preconceptions, and, pretty intimate with Dylan's story. I'm not a Dylanologist or anything like that. And I did a podcast with a friend of mine from New York a couple of years ago about Dylan books. And I think what we both realized and this guy's quite a bit older than me, but I think what we both realized through that discussion is like it's not even a very live topic for both of us. And I got a lot of Dylan books on my shelf, and the ones I haven't read yet, I really don't plan to read them. I don't know. There's something about Dylan's scholarship, I guess, that doesn't interest me all that much. But I am very interested in his life within film. So I'm glad we're going to do these 2 episodes. I don't know if I'll be able to watch everything we have slated for the next one, but I'm definitely going to try. And this movie has definitely revived my interest in that facet of him for sure. So again, I don't know if I really answered your question, but that's one way to approach it. So.
Yeah, that was our intention, to do a second podcast where we cover Don't Look Back and Eat the Document, and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid and others. And certainly the Scorsese documentary. There's about 7 or 8 other films to cover. We thought we'd just put those on hold. And by the way, Stephen, the guy we're talking about, Reg Hart, when he was showing Don't Look Back, it was impossible to see. It was like 1980. I mean, now it's on TCM, once a month. But it was one of those films that I don't know if I read about it when I went to see it. I probably had. I
like hearing about that, because there's the Eat the Document, something happened, whatever the other version is called. Those are the real hidden ones. I wouldn't have thought of Don't Look Back being one of those that no one could find. So that interests me, because that wasn't until 1980 that you could go some underground place and watch that movie.
And talk about galvanizing. I mean, just the Subterranean Homesick Blues beginning alone was like, I'm sure you're the same, Scott. How can you ever forget, like, sitting there and that suddenly that's there. And I don't think I knew that was coming. And that was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I'm, it's probably typically between you two guys, and definitely after Stephen. I'm born in 61, a little earlier than Scott. I think probably the first Dylan records were, I think, on vinyl, volume 2 of Greatest Hits, like about 74 or so. I bought it in high school. And then, but even before that, we had an 8-track of volume 1. So, and then all the stuff on the radio, but I haven't any of the studio albums. I was I think a pretty dedicated fan by about 77, 78, but Highway 61, Blonde on Blonde, and bringing it, to a lesser extent, bringing it all back home. I do think I had, from reading Lillian Roxon, I think I'd sort of, because she has her Dylan section lays it out as a timeline. I used to pore over her book endlessly. I think I had kind of internalized a lot of what is in this film, maybe from bits and pieces, but mostly from her. So I sort of probably knew a lot of the story even before I was exposed to a lot of the music. As time went on, my interests never budged from really those 3 albums. It did go backwards. I certainly really came to like Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. I remember I got beautiful old Columbia, the old Columbia label, copies at Around Again. Immaculate shape. In fact, and early ones too. One of them is my copy of Freewheelin' is so early that it lists the songs that were deleted, but it doesn't have them. Like I think Talking John Birch Blues.
Collector's item.
Yeah, I know. They're sort of on the road to being really valuable, but they don't have the actual two songs. I think there were two that were removed. I certainly and still and went on. This is so strange. I don't know that Blood on the Tracks. Let's stretch that out to Blood on the Tracks and the Basement Tapes. But after that, I don't care about a single Dylan record, and not Love and Theft, and not Modern Times, and not Time Out of Mind. The ones that were people were going crazy over in the 90s. At all.
Not Down in the Groove.
Not Down in the Groove. Not the one he made with the Grateful Dead.
Knocked Out Loaded.
No, Knocked Out Saved, and Live at Boot None of that means anything. It really and truly doesn't. And I'm even hard pressed to find individual songs that do. I did really like, and I think I don't know how much of it had to do with COVID, but I did like, help me out with the title, his big epic that came out right at the beginning of COVID.
Just listening to
18 minute Murder
Most Foul.
Yeah, I wish it had a different title, but I did like that. I like that. That's more or less my history of Dylan. I know that I spent my last few years of teaching. I had my own Dylan CD that I played in the car with all my favorite songs. I just played it like endlessly, and I never got tired of it. It's just the greatest driving music, just like Tom Thumb's Blues. And I love Dylan and Mad Men. That really affected me too. And that's what I thought of during the hospital scene. I immediately thought, does this hold up against Mad Men? I don't know if you remember, Song to Woody is one of the highlights of Mad Men, because that's the episode where Sally cannot accept the new Gene Jr., young Gene. And Don gives her that little speech about, we don't know what he's going to be in. That's really exciting. And then comes in with Song to Woody, and it's just brilliant. And I liked it in the hospital scene. I really did.
I was thinking, not while I was watching, but when I started thinking about this, and knowing from watching the various videos you guys do in your interest, that music and movies is crucial to you.
Yeah.
And so when you say something like, it made me think of that part in Mad Men. That's the kind of connection that I like, because it's not that I don't make any of those, but my connections are when it happened, and it wasn't that I heard it on the radio, say, but no, it wasn't a part of a soundtrack or anything like that. You mentioned Budokan. I saw that tour. It was awful, but what are you going to do?
You didn't. You weren't in Budokan though, were you? You saw it in San Francisco.
I wasn't at Budokan, but that tour, the one where he did his Neil Diamond imitation, was it was kind of disappointing after, because we went to the band one, the Planet Waves one, whatever it's called nowadays. Anyway, I'm thinking one way that maybe is a little different that I could add that people might not think about in terms of his cultural import at the time was when FM radio became big, underground radio, freeform in the late 60s. And it was my brother who was at college. He said, you got to listen to this station. And the way he described the kind of music they played that was different from what we were used to would be like the Doors' first album, the long version of Light My Fire, or The End. But he said also they play a lot of Bob Dylan. And on regular radio, they played like Rolling Stone. And that was pretty much it. And the thing I can recall about those stations is they played obscurities. They played the songs that you mentioned didn't get to the official albums. They found the copies of those. Now we can find all that stuff, but in those days, they would play the things that where he called himself Blind Boy Grunt, and they would play those.
That's right.
They played the basement tapes back when it was the Great White Wonder, one of the first.
Yeah.
So in that sense, he was like a counterculture figure, even though he was also, people knew him. I mean, it wasn't like he was only counterculture, or that he was, somehow in the underground. No, but he had both those things going for him.
When I first started paying attention to pop music really intently in the early 70s, he is at that point a little bit of a almost like a phantom presence. Like he's making albums, but he's not really a big deal in 70, 71, 72.
No.
That's kind of that gap between, whether you want to say John Wesley Harding or Nashville Skyline to Blood on the Tracks. There's a 3 or 4 year period where obviously Kursakow and all those people are paying a great deal of attention to him. But, me being a radio guy, he certainly wasn't crossing over onto top 40 radio at all, which he did, obviously, in the mid 60s. So he's just sort of this name I know, but he is a bit of a phantom at that time. You want to get a little more specific about the film? I was going to, I'll just start off. Let's start. Why don't we start with the performances? There's 4 main performers. I mentioned them. And I'm going to single out 3 who I thought were, 2 I thought were amazing. And then Timothée Chalamet I thought was fine. So I got to, I could just go on and on. I've been saying so much about him, but I think Ed Norton as Pete Seeger was just incredible myself. Because I wasn't prepared for it. First of all, I don't read up on films. I've told you guys many times. I didn't even know he was in the film. So I'm watching it. Oh, there's Ed Norton. He's playing Pete Seeger. And my only knowledge of Pete Seeger really is from a couple of documentaries, probably mainly the Scorsese one. And I just could not believe how much he is like Pete Seeger. And I know acting's more than that. But he made me laugh. He caught a side of Pete Seeger that made me laugh. One of my favorite moments in the movie is when he's at Newport 65 and everything's going wrong. Someone says, "Well, how are you doing, Pete?" He says, "Oh, filled with jubilation, through and through." He was so funny, I thought. And then his speech about the teaspoons and you bring a shovel, Bob. You brought a shovel. It was just so funny from start to finish, I thought. So I give high praise to him, and high praise, even though I don't think she was really, I think she caught one part of Joan Baez, which is, she would always call Dylan on his nonsense in all the documentaries I've seen. She wasn't really like Joan Baez. She didn't really look like her, but I really liked that version of Joan Baez, that character. I thought that it was a really interesting performance, really kind of hard-edged, very beautiful. And Timothée Chalamet, he just really had to. It's not really, in a sense, it's not really a challenging role because he's mostly giving, short, 1 6-word answers to people. But it's also one that he could really mess up if you're sitting there thinking, they need someone else. He never did for me. I'd stop thinking about him pretty quickly. It was just Bob Dylan. And the 4th thing I'll talk about later.
Oh, go ahead.
What do you guys think of the performances?
Stephen?
Oh, okay.
You always have a lot of thoughts on. No, but you always have a lot of thoughts on performances, so I'm definitely interested.
Okay, well, to the ones you mentioned, when I wrote about it, I said that Timothée Chalamet sounded like Dylan because who can't sound like Dylan?
Yeah,
and that Joan Baez, that Monica Barbaro, she didn't because who can sound like that beautiful voice? But that I thought that the character as written, Joan Baez, I liked that character. I thought that what Timothée Chalamet had working against him was that Dylan, he was inward. He didn't jabber away about all of his stuff. So there wasn't much to play with. He had to just be mysterious, complete unknown for the whole movie.
Right.
And that's not a bad performance, but it means that he's not grabbing the screen.
No,
you mentioned Pete Seeger, and what I loved about that is that a person who didn't like Pete Seeger would say he got it. And a person who loved Pete Seeger would say he got it. It was like his performance was so Pete Seegerish that your opinion of Pete Seeger was justified, no matter whether you liked him or not. I thought that was remarkable. The 2 others I would mention are, first, I have to give a shout out to Scoot McNairy, who played Woody Guthrie, just because he's one of those actors I see around, and Whenever I spot him, I go, "Oh, there's Scoot McNairy. He's no
I've never
good, you
seen
know
him.
it."
Can you tell me one other thing he's been in?
He was in the TV show that I'm blanking out on now. That ran for 4 seasons, and they were computer programmers. And I can't believe I can't remember the name now. And he was in he was in Monsters. Yeah, he's not a big name.
Okay.
Anyway, I like seeing him, and I thought he was okay. Finally, I was I disappointed. I don't know. I had nothing against the performance, but Susie Rodolo, who whatever they called her in the movie, that was to me was the worst part of the entire movie. Uh, I don't know if you guys have read, but I've read her memoir. She's interesting. You can make a movie about her life. She's interesting, and she was influential to Dylan's thinking at the time when they were together. And in this movie, she's just like, oh, Bob, he left me alone, and yeah, it's like a very typical role. And I'm like, and Elle Fanning, who I've loved since I don't know Super 8. I don't know. I mean, I just felt bad for her because I thought the part was written poorly,
Yeah.
and said she didn't have anything she could do, and it was unfair to the character. So in that sense, that might have been my least favorite part in terms of the characterizations. I'll add one more thing, which relates to the topic of biopics. Uh, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but one thing is you have famous people. We all know who Bob Dylan is, but then in the background, you've got Albert Grossman. You've got Dave Van Ronk was in one scene. They didn't call him Dave. He said a few words and then he wasn't even there anymore. It wasn't until the credits that I saw that somebody was playing Maria Muldaur. I didn't know Maria
Oh, she
Muldaur was in there.
passes at Newport. She walks by, and I did sort of recognize her. And somebody says, "So I think Seeger says, oh, hi, Maria."
Yeah, I was like, okay, what is she doing there? I also we were at dinner with a friend who loved Peter, Paul, and Mary and hadn't seen the movie, and I said, well, here's the thing. Peter, Paul, and Mary were probably more important, certainly, than Joan Baez in exposing Dylan to the larger audience at the time by their recordings of his songs.
Especially
And I
they
said,
the number
well,
one hit with "Blowing in the Wind."
yeah.
They
So I said, in this movie, there's no Paul, there's no Mary, there's only Peter, and his only part is to be one of the jerks on the committee that doesn't want Dylan to plug his guitar in. And I'm not the biggest fan of Peter, Paul, and Mary, but that was another one where I thought that's kind of a misrepresentation of a group that was important in terms of popularizing Dylan.
Yeah.
and he died just within the last 2 weeks.
He just died, right? Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
turned out he had a real shady past. Like
Yeah. I'd heard about that before, actually.
Shady doesn't even describe it. I don't know. It was your sister? I think it was your sister, Scott, maybe posted how much? No, you know what? It was Chris Malamphy's sister posted about how much she loved Peter, Paul, and Mary.
I don't think it'd be my sister, but
It was Chris Malamphy's sister. And I thought, now I don't communicate with his sister, but I was thinking, if this were somebody I knew, would I even want to mention this? Like, if Peter Yarrow was important, this person, is this the time to mention it? You might want to wait at least, but wow, he did some pretty awful stuff. Go ahead, Scott.
actually, just on the Peter Yarrow thing, when our daughter Ava was born 16 years ago, and that, like, when she grew up a little bit, you'd buy kids CDs. And the one that there was one that is like, my God, this is amazing. Like, I would actually listen to this on my own. And I didn't realize, I can't remember where we got it, or someone maybe gave it to us. I think I might have bought it. Maybe it was it was a book and a CD, but it was Peter Yarrow. And it was just like really beautiful folk music. And I think like we played it in Ava's room, and when she went to bed every single night. And then I got curious about, I guess this is the guy from Peter, Paul, and Mary. I should look up what he's been doing. And that's when I found out about all these things he had done in his past, which was kind of weird or whatever.
I didn't hear about it till he died. And the reason it was forgotten was because he was convicted the day that the Iranian hostages were released. It kind of got buried in the news.
But having said that, I have to say that kids folk music CD he put out, it was very, very good. Like, it was, you don't find a lot of sort of kids music that is actually really pleasant to listen to, and that was one. But anyway, neither here nor there. So I would say I definitely agree with Steven. It sounds like Phil does too about Elle Fanning. I mean, for me, that's the maybe the one or certainly the most obvious place where the movie does fall into this sort of conventional biopic trap. It's just like, oh God, it's like sort of like what would you say? I don't want to say the tragic female or something, but the one who's there to serve the muse. And yeah, I mean, the thing that's maddening about that too is I do understand that she did have a very interesting life, and I don't know, like there just could have been a better way to write that character. I'm convinced. I haven't read that book. I actually really want to. I know Marcus and a few other people have raved about that book. So yeah, that was just like the screen. It's just one of those things where the movie kind of goes flat a little bit when it's the scenes between her and him. It started out okay, like the scene where they went to see the Betty Davis movie and stuff. That was kind of nice. But the more they're kind of hanging around in her apartment and all that stuff, it just, I mean, you feel bad for her, like at Newport when she's watching Joan Baez and Dylan singing, and so it's not like, I guess what I'm saying is I sort of agree with Steve. It's not so much the performance, but it just poorly conceived character overall, and likely not true to the person. That's the other thing. And there's another one I'm going to mention along the same lines. It was a much lesser part of the film, but I kind of got curious about this person. I don't often do this, and I Googled them, and I found out it actually, yeah, this was kind of a maybe even a worse depiction in the movie. And I will say I did love the movie, by the way. But Toshi Seeger, Pete Seeger's wife, she was kind of like towards the end of the movie, I'm like, okay, I'm sort of getting sick of this like deeply concerned or impressed stare. It's like, give this woman some words or something. And I wish I should, maybe I'll post when I put this together, I should actually maybe put the address. There's a Substack page. This woman did an article, and she was completely offended by that, the depiction of her. And she cited all these things that Pete Seeger's wife was not just Pete Seeger's wife. Like she actually had a major hand in putting the Newport Folk Festival together. And I can't cite what they all are now, but in the movie, she sort of becomes reduced to this person who's just like, especially towards the end, there's these two scenes where she's just like, like he focuses on her face, giving this longing look or this empathetic look. And you sort of get what the point is, but it's like, that's another sort of poorly conceived depiction. I think that actually did kind of bug me seeing it. And then when I read that stuff, it's like, yeah, like either keep her out of the film or give her some life. I mean, you didn't have to make her probably not a critical part of the story, but to reduce her to someone who just like mostly is Pete Seeger's wife and just, kind of looks good. I don't know. I found that a little, I don't have much to say, but I actually probably like Timothée Chalamet, maybe even a little more than the way Phil described it. I think because I guess I went in not really wanting to see too much of a Dylan impersonation. I thought that would just be kind of embarrassing. Yeah. And I thought like he kind of had a really good balance between like being credible enough and like the mannerisms and all that sort of stuff, but you still sort of feel like you're watching a performance, but it in no way like bothered me. I just found him like really compelling to watch. I don't know any other way to say it than that, but he didn't personify Dylan, but he personified a good way to depict Dylan in a movie that's not too, it would have been bad if he had none of Dylan's mannerisms, but it would have been just as bad if he had tried to get him exactly to a T. So,
yeah. No, that's a good point. He sort of strikes the balance. The Yoshi Seeger thing, Scott.
Toshi.
Sorry, Toshi Seeger. Somebody on the message board posted a link to that Substack piece, and it became a big topic of conversation. Exactly we were talking about. It didn't bother. Maybe I don't. I don't know enough about her. I agree.
I was bothered before I knew anything about her. I want to be clear about that. I didn't like it in the movie. It was bugging me towards the end. It wasn't. This isn't a political comment by me. I just thought like,
because she's just looking. She's just always looking, gazing.
Yeah.
And really, her big act in the film is she shows up and shakes her head at Pete Seeger. Don't pull the plug, I put the Elle Fanning, who first time I wrote about the film, I called her Emma Stone. Anyway, I put the blame for that performance not on her, but on the writing. First of all, they make her do the same scene twice. Maybe once, fine, where Baez and Dylan are singing, and clearly, there's a deep love between them, and she has to look and get progressively more upset first time. Okay, and then they redo the scene again at 65. So that was a bit much. I knew the actor who played Dave Van Ronk because he was, I just saw him in the mayor of Easttown or whatever.
Right. The mayor of something street or something. Yeah.
Oh, he was
McDougal
the
Street.
brother. He was the brother in the morning show. He was Reese Witherspoon's brother. That's where I knew him from.
Can I ask you guys about one performance? I have not. I did look at some reviews, and I did not see one person mention this, and I thought it was pretty interesting, but it wasn't overdone, luckily. But what did you guys think of the guy who played Albert Grossman? I got a kick out of that performance.
But it was just sort of comic relief almost. He was a funny Grossman, really. Talk about people who shaped everything that Dylan did. I mean, Grossman was like his thumb was on everything, right? And had total control of Dylan. I think.
I just thought he was funny, and the very first time he hears Dylan sing, he says to some guy, "This guy's good, eh?" And he goes, "Yeah, he's my client." He hadn't met the guy, right? But that was funny, and he looked funny, that guy. But
yeah, I don't know the actor.
If there was any more of him, though, it would have been too much. I mean, they just had a good amount of him. So.
Who else? He managed a whole bunch of people at that time. I mean, I guess, did he manage Bias? I couldn't tell from the film.
It was hard to tell because
I think he
did the band.
Did he manage the band too?
When they became the band,
that's right. Yeah.
So I wanted to single out some particular scenes I loved. I liked the whole folky part of the film. I thought by the time they get 65, it's weighted down a bit. Like, this is significant. And we're going to work up to Newport. But I thought just the whole folk section went by. I liked it all. I especially loved, I really liked the opening scene. The opening scene kind of sets the foundation or structure of the film, which is that it's about people reacting to Dylan. You're watching, he plays Song to Woody, and you're watching Pete Seeger, and you're watching Woody Guthrie react. And you can't really tell. Woody Guthrie, I think he bangs his fist, but you don't know what it means at the time. And Seeger's just looking, and he's not smiling. He's just looking and listening. And that carries on through the whole film. The musical highlights for me were certainly the Baez Dylan. I think they did It Ain't Me, Babe, maybe Girl from the North Country. Those two performances, they had the one where they argued, and that was sort of funny. But the two straight performances they did, I thought were just amazing. Like, I thought the music was perfect. The interplay between them was perfect. And I also really loved, and this was maybe for me the best scene in the film, when he plays The Times They Are A-Changin', because that's where they really focus on Seeger's reaction and Baez's reaction. And but Seeger's smiling like ear to ear, and Baez is just she's like locked in, immersed in what he's doing. The crowd is singing along. I'm sure imagine this is made up, or singing along. The second time he gets to the verse, the whole audience is singing. I love that scene. And I loved, the song. I mean, I could probably be happy to live the rest of my life without ever hearing it again, just because it's been overplayed, Blowing in the Wind. The first time they sing that together, remember, he's working on it, and she comes over, joins in, and then it's got just the greatest line when they finish. She looks at him and she says, "So that's what?" And he says, "I don't know." That's it. That is, I think, just captures that he's doing something that none of them have ever heard or seen. She says, "So that's what?" I don't know.
Yeah,
I love that. That was in terms of the script and lines, that was the highlight of the film for me. So those are four of my favorite parts.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the music. The real music, as much as that. My history of Dylan is I loved the first album that kind of gets crapped on in the movie where they say, "Oh, don't do cover versions anymore." If you've ever heard the originals of the songs he puts on that first album, yeah, I guess they're the same song, but I would say he destroys them. He brings them to life in such a wonderful way. And then the next two albums were the protest ones. Nothing against him, but it wasn't until Another Side, I guess it is, when he starts changing his writing, that connected with me. But the important part in terms of my reaction was Like a Rolling Stone, more than Maggie's Farm. I was, as I was sitting in the theater, I wanted to be grumpy. I was spotting everything that wasn't right, meaning, is that really what Mike Bloomfield wore? I mean, the littlest thing, I was going to be mad about it. I was bothered that they took the Judas scene from England and stuck it in the middle of Newport, all that stuff. And then when he started to sing, and again, it wasn't Maggie's Farm, which is when he first plugs in. It's Like a Rolling Stone, and I thought, this is outside of the you guys asked me to see this movie. I thought this is why I'm here right now. I was like tearing up because that song, that was like from the time it came out for me, that was like the national anthem. And so to see it expressed that way, I didn't care anymore that how much of it was true, quote unquote. I didn't care whether or not Timothée Chalamet sounded like Dylan or whether or not the guy really did Bloomfield's. I just, that song matters enough to me. And I even with not wanting to have it happen, I was going like, oh God, it's like a Rolling Stone. Luckily, I was by myself, so nobody saw me. But I mean, I was just overcome with that scene.
I thought the
No
version,
matter whether I couldn't tell if it's good or bad.
I thought it was good. I thought they did a good job on
Stephen,
it.
the first note I wrote, I did take some notes because I had to write them shortly after seeing it just so I wouldn't forget some stuff. But and I'm not embarrassed to admit this, but not the Rolling Stone scene, but in the first hour, I'd say the first hour, first 45 minutes, honest, and I saw the movie by myself. I was holding back tears about three different occasions. I don't know what it like, and I was actually thinking to myself, am I just like tired and feeling vulnerable? Like it was really like I was literally fighting back tears a couple of times. Like, oh my God, like this is really,
I can
really getting to me. And I don't know why. I mean, I've had some theories since. It's like just it's because like the world is such a distraught place, and it just to see some beauty on the screen is just a relief from other things going on in the world. But I mean, the bottom line is it's just really well done as a film, I guess. And I don't usually, I could be a little weepy at movies more so than Phil, I think for sure. I just have that in me. But I got really choked up. I know for the Woody Guthrie was the first one. I can't remember for sure what the other ones were. I'll tell you what a highlight was for me, though. Two highlights, musical. Um, I loved, and I can't wait to see it again in some ways to see if it's as good as I remember this, but I loved the way they cut in Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, which is one of my favorite songs by him. But I think the way they did it is they had him doing a version maybe for the first time in the studio. And I don't know if it was Tom Wilson or someone like, what song is, who wrote this one? And then they cut away, and it's a really beautiful pan, if I remember correctly, too, to Joan Baez doing it live. And hers is in like a different key and stuff. It's a bit jarring at first, but I remember just like, oh man, like this just shows like how kind of like malleable this song is or something. Like it was really well done. Like his version was perfect for what it was, and then it shoots over to hers. And I got to say one thing about Joan Baez. Like honestly, I know almost nothing about Joan Baez. I have never in my life listened to a Joan Baez album. It's not I have anything against her. So this movie kind of it's interesting that you guys said about Monica Barbaro, how she didn't quite and I can see that in the look obviously and stuff. But honestly, I can't really judge it against Joan Baez because I know so little about her. So this movie kind of opened up that character for me in that way. The other musical moment I will. Oh, so Phil mentioned the times they are changing scene, and yeah, that's definitely one of the ones I almost teared up on for sure. But it's interesting because the obvious great bit in that, and it is great, is when the crowd, like on the second chorus, it's like they've already tuned into it enough that they can repeat it. But what I thought was even a little better than that, because I think we've probably all experienced this with Bob Dylan in particular. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think when he gets to like the third or the fourth verse, he's got that line about
Sons and daughters.
yeah, sons, and like the way the crowd on the spot is just so kind of blown away by like the wordplay. And I can remember like first time hearing Dylan songs and it'd be the same thing. It's like, oh my God, like how did he ever come up with that rhyme? And I just love the way the crowd, like I think, yeah, beyond your command. And you hear, it's like, oh my God, like what a great lyric. Like, how did he do this kind of thing? And I thought that was really, really well played. And even if that, and I have read that performance never quite happened like that. But I think it's still true. I would imagine, and that was not an electric Dylan, so you would hear all the words and stuff. And I think even Don't Look Back got at that a little bit, right? Like there's scenes in Don't Look Back where he's playing songs and you can kind of tell the crowd is responding to them like it's the first time they've heard them or something, or there's just certain lines and they're like, wow, like. So I thought that was incredibly effective. I can't wait to see those two scenes again in particular. So.
Well, I think in Don't Look Back, you certainly get that when he plays It's All Over Now, Baby Blue.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, and Donovan's just like his jaw hits the floor, right?
Yeah.
The reaction you had, Scott, about almost tearing up. I didn't have that in this movie, although I love certain parts, but I've written about this. I've had that just being in a bar. And when Dylan comes on in a public setting, it's incredibly moving to me. I remember sitting with teachers. We were out in a bar after work, and Mr. Tambourine Man played, which I heard 10 billion times. And I almost was like, that Seinfeld episode where Elaine's boyfriend, his song was Desperado, the Eagles, and he would go into France. And that's what I was like. I remember one particular teacher, and I'm like, I don't want to talk. I just want to listen to this. You're listening to Bob Dylan, and there are people around us, and it's just the greatest thing in the world. So I know exactly how you felt.
Phil, can I want to ask you a question on something that Stephen had said, and I've got a bit of a response to it, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. Because I'm sure some people, the music fans watching the movie, must be thinking about this. But what did you think of the use of the whole Judas scene? Because obviously it's interpolated or whatever.
That didn't bother me at all because I knew that it was wrong, but it just didn't bother me because I knew the point they were making. Like the crowd didn't like it and they thought he was a traitor, betrayed. So that did not bother me in the least. At the same time, if it bothered somebody, I can understand why. A lot of people were saying,
I thought it worked.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, but it worked.
Yeah, why did you have to do that? It was overkill because the point had already been made. So I see both points of view on that.
Well, and when I think about it, and in retrospect, I actually thought, in a way, this is the director actually respecting the intelligence of the audience. Like there'll be a big portion of the audience who it won't mean anything to, and they might not even catch it, which is another good thing about it. Like they don't, it comes and it goes kind of thing, right? But to the people who do know the whole story, it's in a way it's respecting your intelligence because it's saying like, yeah, we know that, but we want to just get it it feels like it should be a part of this story, but we're not going to Manchester, England or whatever to do this. Like you're going to get the point just as putting it in there. And the fact that they didn't make it a big deal, I think was really good because it really does kind of come and go fast, right? Like it's not a
dwell on it.
Yeah, they just like let it go, and it's like so. I actually thought it was a wise decision to have it and to include it the way to use it the way they did. So,
I want to single out one more thing I really like. Then I want to build on Stephen talking about omitting Peter, Paul, and Mary. There's another major omission, I think. I really like the old blues guy who it was a fictional character in the TV studio.
So he was fictional. He was
probably supposed to be somebody, but
I haven't seen it. He's supposed to be anybody.
A composite, maybe whatever.
Generic,
yeah. I just thought it was funny. He was funny, and Dylan walking in, like the last minute, and Pete Seeger trying trying to, make everything work. Oh, whoa. Like, how
Wait,
does
isn't the guy trying to get Pete Seeger to have a drink or something?
he does,
Yeah.
oh, we don't do that here.
Can't do that.
Yeah. But then trying, how do I not offend this guy? Bob's arrived and we want to get Bob on. How do I not offend him? And Bob is very deferential to the blues guy. The blues guy loves Dylan. And I thought that whole scene was great. So yeah, Peter, Paul, and Mary definitely should have been mentioned. For some reason, they mentioned the Baez's live version of "Blowing in the Wind." Somebody even says, "Oh, don't worry." Bob Dylan says, "Don't worry, it's just on the live album. It's not going to be on the radio." Well, we know that there was a #1 version of that on the radio.
Yeah.
But I thought even more important in some ways. Like that was very important. Newport I had to check the date on this. In the weeks leading up to Newport, maybe a month before, the Byrds hit #1 with Mr. Tambourine
I
Man.
thought about that a little bit actually.
I think you gotta work that in for some context, because certainly everybody in that audience knows that. They know Dylan already has had a huge rock and roll breakthrough with a song he wrote, not performed, but that seems to me kind of, it was worth it should have been mentioned somehow. Work it in there. That was probably the one thing that kind of jarred me. I wasn't, usually I go on, well, why weren't the Beatles in it more? They mentioned the Beatles once.
I did think about the Beatles. I couldn't decide if they maybe should have had a little more.
It's hard to say,
Not the actual Beatles or even a
but
them on TV, but just Dylan saying something about them or something. I don't know. I mean, it's fun. I like that they had the Kinks was a neat scene. I mean,
I wish someone would make a film about the interaction between, you can make it the Beatles, Dylan, or you can throw in the Rolling Stones, throw in the Beach Boys, throw in Motown. Just the way all those parts, and Stephen, that would be what you would have knowledge of that, we don't have firsthand knowledge, just how all those parts fit together. Just the big, radio was filled with one-offs and everything, but just pick 4 or 5 key performers who we know we're all paying attention to each other, like watching, especially Dylan and the Beatles and Brian Wilson. And they were all watching Motown. Just get all of them, make a film out of that. But it didn't, the absence of the Beatles didn't bother me too much. But I was more jarred, not jarred. I actually didn't even think about it till later, the Byrds. It was after the film I thought about that.
I had like my final wrap up of the whole thing that we saw in this movie. There's a book, I could never remember the name. It's about the Stones in the early '70s, and it was written by their drug dealer, Tony something.
Tony
And the
Sanchez.
blurb on the back
Tony
says
Sanchez
something
up
like,
and down with the Rolling Stones. Yeah.
that's it, yes. And the blurb on the back from Keith Richards, if anybody could tell you the truth, it's bad as Tony, And I think it was Marcus who
which he also said about
he
Stanley
said.
Booth, though.
Sure. I think it was Marcus, if not, whatever. Somebody said, you can read this whole book and have no idea how they ever made Exile on Main Street. They're just fucked up. Well, at the end of A Complete Unknown, I'm thinking to myself, interesting, like this, didn't like that. I have still got no idea how that man wrote like a Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
And the best response I've gotten to that is my wife, who didn't even see the movie, but she said, "Can anybody answer that question? Can Bob Dylan answer that question?
That's what I would
Probably
say.
not. It's just came in the air, whatever." But I didn't learn any more about the guy who wrote that song as before I'd seen the movie. That didn't make the movie bad. But
I think
that's because it mattered to me, so I wanted to know. And yeah.
But see, I would flip that around. I would flip that on its head to say, yeah, I didn't learn more about the guy who wrote the song, but I learned more about the song in a different way. Like I heard the song in a different way, and that ultimately speaks to me a little more. Like it's interesting because I don't think the movie really shows a lot about Dylan's life, like outside of writing songs and performing.
Right.
And I'm kind of like probably very good with that. Like, I don't know. and he just like these songs, he just sits around, and maybe that gets to be a tiny bit of a cliche. Like it doesn't really bother me so much, and most of those scenes are pretty good. But he just does these songs, and then again, they don't really dwell on it. And I mean, they actually, here's a good question to ask you guys. I think they came borderline close to another biopic cliche a little bit with the Cuban Missile, like, but they did do the sequencing wisely, if I think. Like they had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is a well played scene, I thought, and then I think him working on Hard Rain, but they didn't actually, or no, they didn't know that was that what was good about it. They had Cuban Missile Crisis, but they didn't actually play Hard Rain till a little later in the film. The more obvious thing to do would have been to have the Cuban Missile Crisis and immediately cut to Hard Rain. Although I do think they cut to Masters of War. So it was borderline like, okay, this big event takes place and I'm going to respond with a song, which
I
he
thought
did.
the same.
So that's
I
the
thought
thing.
the same
He
on that.
did. So you can't get around that.
He was playing Masters of War. He went off to the club and he was playing Masters of War.
Right.
That's where Baez and him, spent the night together for the first time. I kind of like the way that was done.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Stephen, what you were talking about, though, I think that's what that scene with Blowing in the Wind got at, where Baez says, so that is what? And he says, I don't know. And Dylan, I've quoted this before. I saw this one interview with him, and he was talking about like a Rolling Stone or something. It might have been like a Rolling Stone or maybe Highway 61. And he says, I can still do lots of things, but I can't do that anymore. I don't know where that came from.
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you have to kind of respect the mystery. Like, I'll tell you, when I was just looking something up on Wikipedia, you know how long it took him to record Bringing It All Back Home? 2 days.
Oh, really?
All the days.
One per side?
The date you recorded, January 14th, January 14th, January 14th, and then a couple songs, January 15th, January 15th. Highway 61 took longer, I assume, probably mostly because of like Rolling Stone, which Marcus wrote a book on the 50, 500 takes they took or whatever. But how could you do Bringing It All Back Home in 2 days?
Wow.
Incredible.
I guess side one, side two.
I guess so.
In some ways, that's not that uncommon, though, for that time. I think
not. You're right.
I think what bands did is they rehearsed before they went in the studio, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Like I don't think it took the Stones a long time to record their albums, and even the Beatles. I think those early, until you get to Rubber Soul and Revolver, and especially Sgt. Pepper. I think the Beatles, like even stuff like Help, they did those things in not that many takes. I don't think. I could be wrong.
True enough. Well, they were churning them out, 3 albums.
It was all done live, right? But they would rehearse the hell out of them before they'd even go into the studio, I think. Because before the studio itself was considered a tool, right? It was just there to record. So
we'll have to talk about some other time, Scott, but I finished the Exile on Main Street, the 33 and a third. One other omission, totally unimportant. He would have no place in the film, but
I know who you're going to say, but I'm not going to say it.
No Warhol and no.
I knew you were going to say Andy Warhol.
I'm teaching an art class tomorrow, grade 5, and the teacher, I've already seen her day plan, Warhol art. So I wrote her today. I said, I'm going to talk your ear off on Warhol. I'm hauling in 3 big books, I got to be careful. God knows I don't want to get myself in trouble again. And that's when he made Blowjob, boys and girls.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Don't worry. Board of Education, go somewhere else. Anyway, anything else you guys want to add? Here's a question for accuracy. Was it not, and I love the film, I'm just nitpicking now. Was it not a total fabrication to switch the villain of Newport from Pete Seeger to Alan Lomax? Like, does that have any basis? Alan Lomax was suddenly the guy.
No.
Yeah, see, I don't know, and I was actually going to ask you guys, was that was the one character that confused me? So that was Alan Lomax, the guy yelling and screaming.
It took me a while to figure it out. Piece together credits. That was
I don't know the story of that. So
out in the field making recordings. See,
apparently it's semi based on a book by Elijah Wald, and I think that's the stuff that his book is largely about. Because I have a feeling his book is part of the theme, and I haven't read it, and honestly I'm probably not, because what I said earlier about Dylan books, but I think part of his thing is maybe that like Pete Seeger and some of the old sort of folk revivalists maybe have sort of had a bum rap over the years, and they weren't
Okay.
as vehement about that. So maybe that's why they took the emphasis a little bit off Pete Seeger. I don't know though. I'm not even going to pretend to know the answer to that.
Seeger's very empathetic in the film. He's like, please, well, Bob is, he's what he's doing. He's moving ahead. He's moving ahead. We have to respect that or something. It was funny.
I just had one other thought, and I'd be curious to know if what you guys think about this. About, I guess you could say it'd be about Chalamet, how his character was written. The one thing maybe I wouldn't, and again, I judge what's on the screen, not what's not there. But I think if there's one thing maybe that was downplayed a little bit, was the sort of the comic Bob Dylan.
Really was.
I do remember I think one of the things when I got into Dylan back in the when I discovered Don't Look Back, one of the first things I did was read the Anthony Scaduto book, which I think at that time was maybe one of the only well-known biographies of Dylan.
Yes.
And I remember, I haven't read it since then, but I remember he would go on. I remember the name Charlie Chaplin kept coming up in that book, how Dylan was so much like Charlie Chaplin, and he'd do all these funny things on stage and off stage. And they do have a bit of that, obviously. He cracks some jokes here and there. But I've always thought that's a part of the early Dylan that's always been underrepresented, is just how funny he could be. And I do wonder if maybe the film could have used a little bit of that, or would it have broke the mood? I don't know, because the mood was great.
His albums back then, they would usually have at least one of those talking blues, which were almost always comic.
A lot of jokes.
World War III or whatever. So, yeah, he was funny.
I think you're right. I haven't thought about that. That is missing. Certainly, just him making all those jokes and Don't Look Back, or the one clip where
the T.S. Eliot thing and Don't Look Back or whatever, like, I'll let you be in your T.S. Eliot wrote that or something.
Or there's a scene in one of those Penn Baker things where he's talking about being booed, and he's going, and I'm going to boo them, and ooh, and they didn't get any of that in. I hadn't really thought about that, which shows you how much I like what was there, because I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I think we all liked it to different degrees, and I was totally prepared to hate it. I really was.
I wasn't even going to see it, to be honest with you. And you, Phil, said, Scott, you should see it. And then I'd heard a couple other people who I trusted said, no, it's good. So I thought, okay, well, why wouldn't I go see it? And I loved it. I will say it was probably the best movie I've seen in the theater in a long time. I don't see many movies in theater.
I'm my favorite film.
Happy to go see it again for sure.
Okay, so we all have homework to do, unless Steve, maybe you have them all filed away.
You're taking this teacher thing too far, Phil.
Next time we're going to look at Don't Look Back, Eat the Document, No Direction Home, the Sam Peckinpah film. I don't know if I'm ever going to watch Masked and Anonymous.
I'm going to actually try and make
which one?
Watching that. I've got that on DVD.
Anonymous.
Masked and Anonymous.
Oh no! Wait a minute. Come on, we have to stop somewhere.
I'll watch it. I think it's a weird film. I kind of want to see it again. What about the Todd Haynes?
Oh, Todd Haynes. That's one that I do have to look at.
There you go.
Yeah. So we'll have lots to talk about next time. Okay. Okay. Thanks, guys.
All right.
I'm heading off on my Triumph motorcycle. You won't hear from me for 2 or 3 years, so I'm holding up the next one. Okay.
I'll come over. We'll
Thanks, guys.
Sing some old folk songs.
Yeah, that's right. Take care, you guys.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. You ending this, Scott?
Yes, I am.